at some level maintaining their abstinence while in recovery and for the rest of their lives. Some of the objectives today, hopefully, that I will be able to share is heightened awareness of problem gambling prevention, identify vulnerable and at-risk populations, something that is very prevalent in the addiction world. We will discuss individuals that are duly addicted, whether it's to gambling, mental health, substance use, etc. And then I will end up with some suggestions, some guidelines for responsible gambling. Who is 800 Gambler? Our official name is the Council on Compulsive Gambling of New Jersey, more commonly known as 800 Gambler. The council is either neither for nor against gambling. Our sole and singular purpose in the state of New Jersey and our colleagues throughout the country and globally is to let people know that there are resources available to overcoming a gambling problem, obtaining some kind of abstinence, and hopefully preventing it with education. So just a brief definition, what is gambling? Participating in any game or activity which an individual will risk something of value in order to win something of value. When many think of gambling, the first thing that comes to mind is the money component to gambling. But how about the time that's spent, the preoccupation, et cetera, which I will get in a little bit further. When people think of prevention, most of the times, very rarely, gambling is not the first thing that pops into someone's mind. Possibly they would think of substance use facilities, substance use services for mental health, trauma, violence, et cetera, et cetera. Gambling is something that takes place globally, has taken place globally for centuries. And one of the biggest things with gambling, as opposed to maybe some of the other disorders, addictions, problems that we see in individual lives, whatever that may look like, is that many can gamble responsibly, can gamble as a form of entertainment, which I believe is one of the big distinctions between gambling and many of the other issues that we see in society. Very briefly, what is prevention? It's just a sharing of information in order to prevent or minimize future harm. Whether it's preventing it, giving people the information, individuals the information beforehand, before potentially it will become a problem, some of the pitfalls that gambling might present, and even those that small percentage that develop a problem with gambling and gaming, how do they maintain their abstinence, their recovery, as I had mentioned earlier? You know, these are all things that need to be considered. Harm reduction. You know, sometimes it's not so easy for an individual who does develop a problem with gambling to just stop immediately. Sometimes it's just minimizing the harm, providing information, etc. So, the at-risk groups, adolescents and the youth, college students, individuals experiencing mental and/or substance use issues, seniors, I mean, all demographics, all walks of life. Everyone gambles. I become more concerned when individuals tell me that they don't gamble. I don't necessarily believe that's possible. I think I understand what they're saying. I do understand what they're saying. It's not that they're not gambling, it's that they don't have a problem with gambling. Gambling hasn't caused problems in their lives or their family lives, their significant others, etc. But prevention really starts with the adolescents and the youth, which is, I believe, where the education really has to start. children are exposed to a plethora of things today. The whole world of video gaming. Video gaming has existed for a while, for years, for decades, maybe longer. But over the last couple of years, this randomness component has been added to it, and they are exposed very young. The younger generations, which I believe is, don't quote me on this, I believe they're referred to as Gen Zs, are the most technologically advanced group when you talk about the different generations, the millennials, the baby boomers, the Gen X's, the Gen Ys. They are raised with the technology almost from birth. My personal experience, and I've discussed this with other parents. When I hear individuals says, "Oh, I have a 7-year-old and he can write code," I'm not even sure exactly what that means. Okay, but you have to be mindful of these things. I just recently was reading. Actually, it was yesterday with testimony that was giving. They had all the big tech companies there and stuff. And, you know, the one thing that struck out at me was that they actually mentioned YouTube Kids. My 3.5-year-old grandson knows how to navigate YouTube, knows how to handle the devices better than I do. You know, it's the world that he's grown up in from the day that he was born. His mom, and he sees the devices that his mom and his dad have. Then he moves on and he meets individuals. Yes, even at that young age, he's in preschool now. And I know this is very common. They use tablets as a form of education. He knows how to navigate YouTube Kids, and this is not a criticism. I believe there's educational components to it, but where they go from there, you know, what happens, as I mentioned, when I discuss, and a parent has told me he has a 7-year-old that is learning to write code. Well, that progression is real fast. So in a few years, maybe my grandson will be writing code. I'm not exactly sure, but that's where it really starts. In the schools, educating. I've had success over the last several months, as my colleagues have, and I'm sure others in the industry throughout the country, throughout the world, you know, speaking on the topic of gambling. And the door was open because of video gaming. They are seeing a lot of harm that is potentially being done. And they asked myself and my colleagues to come in and discuss with the adolescents. And as I asked the questions, most of them are very transparent and very simply. And as the theme is for Problem Gambling Awareness Month that we've adopted this year, have the conversation. It's just about talking to them, keeping them, you know, in the loop. They are getting tremendous amounts of education, rightfully so, gratefully so, when it comes to tobacco usage, vaping, potential ills of substances, peer pressure, bullying, et cetera, et cetera. Moving on to the college students, the competitiveness that's developed at a very young age is taken into their studies further on in life when they are attending college. What goes on at the colleges. One of the reasons that March is National Problem Gambling Awareness Month, it coincides with this college basketball tournament that's taking place as we speak. I believe they're playing games today. And the brackets. Yes, maybe the adolescents aren't gambling in the sense of how adults gamble recreationally, but they are introduced to it. Most of them do tell me, yes, we filled out the brackets. Oh, my brother or relative, you know, is going to this university, that college, et cetera, et cetera. So I would like that team to win. Most of them do it for fun. There are a lot of free online tournaments that are offered today by various outlets, and they participate. But they also do things such as fill out their brackets, maybe put in $1 each, depending on the number of students or classmates or friends that participate. Someone monitors, or a couple individuals monitor it, and at the end of this tournament, the individual that has correctly picked the most teams to win, the most number of teams to advance as the progression of this tournament takes place, would win that pool, regardless of the amount. Is that gambling? Absolutely. Is it something to be mindful of? Yes. but it's not spoken about. When I say this to them, they don't necessarily have that understanding. And let me jump a little further later in life to the seniors. The seniors tell me, oh no, we don't gamble. Those tell me they do gamble. Historically, they've had bus trips, although that's curtailed over the years. Now, because of the environment that we're in, the world has experienced over the last year with the stay at home, the pandemic, COVID, they're probably not going to the casinos. Um, but I asked them, what about bingo? Oh, yeah, absolutely, Frank. We love bingo. We play bingo a couple of days a week, if not more. And it's recreation. It should be fun. But again, going back to the definition of gambling, if it's putting up something of value, even if it's free, it potentially could be the hook that could cause individuals, specifically I'm talking about seniors, to develop problems. A lot of it is innocent. A lot of it starts off free. Um, but they enjoy playing. And I do know that a lot of those in the senior population, regardless of their living arrangements, the medical community, I'm not going to say encourages, but there is research that has stated, I'm not going to get into all of that, that possibly playing these games, whether it's bingo or other activities, enhances their or allows them to maintain their cognitive abilities. Individuals that experience mental health and substance use issues. Well, why do we want to go in and speak to those populations? Because my experiences, and I know my colleagues in the industry have the same similar experiences, that not only is it a co-occurring potentially issue, but a transferring of issues. I have been told from those in the various facilities that are seeking treatment on either an outpatient or inpatient basis for the myriad of issues that falls under mental health and substance abuse issues, that their gambling increases during those periods of sobriety. An individual just recently told me about, and this ties into the whole family aspect, an individual that one of the parents, I believe he said it was his mother, had developed serious gambling problems while working in the industry. And he saw the problems that not only his mother experienced, but how that conveyed to the family unit, that he really doesn't have any interest to gamble, but he has experienced other problems, other addictive behaviors, not necessarily gambling. So settings for prevention education. Schools, colleges, educational settings, parents. I know my colleague Luis last week spoke about techniques, but parents are an integral group that needs to be aware of what the children, what their family members are doing. I'm even expanded to parents that are caregivers for their adult parents, need to be mindful of what's happening. I have heard stories over the years, and I am grateful for this, a presentation that I did to the senior community several years ago. I then later found out from the administrator who I'd spoken to, they said, we're really grateful that you did that presentation, because what has happened of that, we're able to share resources, literature, brochures that I had left, just talking to the caregiver, the adult parents, that there was a gentleman who was a widower, and what they discovered, they were looking for something in his apartment. He lived in an assisted living facility, and what they discovered is a drawer full of lottery tickets. And they said, Dad, what is this about? And he said, oh, those are just losing tickets. I just keep them to write them off for losses. Well, when they tallied up the number of tickets that were in there, what precipitated them doing that, I'm not aware, but I think it was useful that they did that. It was several thousands of dollars. As a result of that, because of conversations they had with their father and information they had learned from the facility about services and resources that are available, the gentleman became involved in a self-help group, and he learned that potentially he may or was already experiencing problems. Substance use in mental health facilities, the importance, as I mentioned, to offer services, offer education in that environment. You know, it's the old chicken before the egg. What came first? And I don't necessarily have the answer to this. Depression, which led to gambling as a coping mechanism, or did gambling lead to a person becoming distressed? Isn't that the, excuse the pun, $1 million question? Senior centers and housings, I touched on this already. Individuals that don't necessarily know the harm, regardless of the demographic, you know, need to be educated, need to understand that there is resources, assistance available if you do develop a problem. I know we're talking about prevention, but even later in life, you know, early onset is an indicator, and I will touch on that in a few minutes, a little bit down the line, that potentially an individual, a youngster, and an adolescent will develop a problem later in life. Early onset. And onset in the gambling world, in the gaming world, in the video gaming world, doesn't necessarily happen overnight. My understanding, what I've learned over the years, the progression is a lot slower than some of the other issues that we see in our society. Warning signs. Preoccupation. If that's all you're thinking about, balance is the key. Yes, you need to have time for recreation, whatever recreation may look like. As an adult, whether it might be gambling, uh, it should only be a small part of your life. The adolescents, video gaming, and you know, you should set your time limits. It should not be an escape from problems. You know, intense cravings, you need to do it. And you start out possibly at 1 hour a day, once a week, whatever the time frame may be. But that is just not enough. You know, the tolerance level increases. So that small amount of time that you start with now all of a sudden becomes a daily, sometimes even an hourly component. And I know today we live in a world where delivery of gambling, video gaming, you no longer have to leave your world. I'm sorry, you no longer have to leave the confines of your home. Everything is driven by technology. And many people do it responsibly. The majority of people, the predominance of people do it responsibly. But there is that small percentage that possibly not being aware, having not been spoken to about the being mindful about the potential harms, and with the online world, the escalation is real quick. You know, inability to stop even though things are not going as planned. Withdrawal, withdrawal from family, withdrawal from things that you enjoyed doing before, attending family functions, spending time with your friends, going outdoors, physical activity, exercise, et cetera, no longer are important. Now, let's talk very briefly about trauma. And the two things I have listed here, ACEs, something that has become very prevalent, and I have delved into it and have attended webinars and workshops. For those that are not aware, ACEs is just the acronym for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And that encompasses a very large range, whether it's being at a very early age exposed to addictive behaviors in the household, drug use, violence, being perpetrated possibly on the individual, or experience violence, being perpetrated on a parent, experiencing a car accident, et cetera, et cetera. Health issues. How do you cope with health issues in the family? And many people do deal with this, whether it's a parent or a grandparent. I look at it this way. If an individual experiences a health issue, whether it might be, God forbid, cancer, diabetes, and the other ailments that we're aware of that are out there in the world, does it not affect the entire family structure? Well, addiction works the same way. Things that are perpetrated, things that are experienced, how do you deal with it? Again, I always come back to, these are things that need to be spoken about, things that need to be shared. The world has changed gratefully. I came from a world where the mindset was, what happens in the household stays in the household. And I know this is a generational thing, and many people have shared this, and it's very difficult to share this information or to talk about things that are very difficult in life. But if you don't talk about it and it becomes internalized, it potentially will cause that problem to turn to adverse experience, you turn to things that are potentially harmful in your life, that as a way of coping with those very harmful experiences. I'm going to spend some time talking about responsible gambling. And as Dan had mentioned, if there's any questions, please type them in the chat. Dan will share them with me. I would rather, address the questions as we go along. I see Dan popping in.
Yeah.
Any thoughts, any questions?
Yeah, we have some active chat going on right now, Frank. I wanted to bounce in at the halfway point and kind of let you know what's happening and also get your feedback as well. We've had some observations. Amy just shared recently that in Pennsylvania, Amy Seacrest from Pennsylvania, and Amy, glad you're here today. They have a program called We Know Better, BETTER, and it's for building kids' skills. So it helps them understand probability of winning. It helps to dispute those gambling myths and magical thinking, and also help youth cope with uncomfortable feelings and being a positive force within your school. And she attached a link for that within the chat. I also then added that we have Stack Deck, and that's something that we've used in the state of New Jersey, both the elements of Stack Deck as well as the program, and it's being updated right now. So we're starting to see more programs that come into play for the youth, because for primary prevention, to your point, Frank, we got to get the kids early, right? I think we're starting to see kids start gambling at earlier ages nowadays than they did in the past, a lot of times because of technology. I mean, is that what you see as well?
Yes, no, absolutely. I didn't include it as part of the PowerPoint, but I think there is research that has been done, and I think a lot of people are shocked to find out that the average age of the adolescents that begin gambling is about 10 years old. Now, I do understand they're not going to the casino, the online casinos, the brick and mortars, legalized sports betting. But those are things that do occur in many of the neighborhoods and many of the communities. At a very young age, they're throwing dice on the corners. They are wagering amongst themselves on sporting events. They are in the schoolyard shooting baskets, and that escalates into a monetary component. What I mean by that is that they are wagering. I'll bet you $1 you can't make this basket. I believe there's a game called Horse, et cetera. So these things do take place. They've taken place for a long time. They continue to take place. Thank you. I wasn't really aware of this program, and that's been instituted in Pennsylvania. I don't know how long it's been in existence. It sounds like, Dan, as you had mentioned, similar to things that we work on with Stack Deck, but it's about educating the youth. And I believe that's where I'm certain, although I'm not certain of anything 100%, it has to begin with the youth. Please don't misinterpret what I'm saying. At any age group, at any demographic, in any culture, in any ethnic group, there's always help. So it's never too late to stop if it's causing harm in your life. But I just don't think historically, my experiences until recently in the work that is being done not only in the state of New Jersey, but in Pennsylvania and many other states, if not all the states, it's really accelerating, the information that is being put out there.
And we always think about prevention as kind of planting seeds, right? And because we don't know what we say, we don't know which one will take. We don't know which one will grow into something bigger in someone's life. But what we do know is that seeds are useless if they're left unopened in the pack sitting on the shelf. Nothing can grow if we don't plant these seeds. So we've got to just start throwing those seeds. Robbie in Pennsylvania, how you doing, Rob? It's good that you're here. He said that in Pennsylvania, one of the bigger concerns, and I think in New Jersey too, is the youth with the scratch-offs, right? The lottery tickets. We've talked to so many people, Frank, around the state, either through our helpline or in the presentations that we give, where they first got their early taste in a Christmas stocking or a birthday card, right? So they're seeing the same thing. And Amy echoes what you just said. It's never too late. Deshonda added, we were talking before about ways of kind of promoting prevention, right? And she made a good point to say, listen, spending more time with kids, doing activities that don't involve handheld devices. And that's so key. Luis also added, spending time, communication with parents, like parental involvement, it starts in the house. Kids spend so much time on social media, on YouTube, they learn from other people, but they also need to learn it from their parents. We have to have good modeling, right? Good role modeling going on in the house. So spending time with our kids at an early age and modeling that behavior, we hope that they'll follow.
Yeah, I'm not, thank all for their comments and their thoughts. I really appreciate it. We live in we all know we live in a very technological world. And I'm not criticizing, I'm not disparaging any of it. There's pros, there's cons, but these adolescents, these young kids, I gave the example, when you hear of 3, 4, 5-year-olds knowing how to use the technology, how to browse through it, again, it's just the world that we live in. And as I mentioned earlier, there is becoming more and more recognition of the potential harms that exist. It almost gives them a mask. We spoke, Dan, you mentioned some of the comments about the parents. They need to be mindful. And I understand sometimes, the devices are used as the babysitter. Maybe no different. I'll speak about myself. I grew up in the era of television, but I do recall sometimes how successful my parents were. Well, that remains to be seen. I think that they were, we limited to the amount of time that we, were able to, and it was like, but even today, just a thought that just popped into my head. I didn't have a television in my room. So if I did something that required me being corrected, I was sent to my room, kicking and screaming. If I had the television in my room, would I have been kicking and screaming as much? The point that I'm trying to make today with technology, a lot of times I hear the children welcome going to their rooms because they know they can jump on their device unless it's removed and do the things that they wanted to do. So how is that a form of correcting, supervising, parenting, et cetera? That's what I interpreted by the comments, and thank you for that.
And the other thing I'll mention too is that just thinking about a conversation we had with a father last week, and he was someone who struggled with gambling, and he says his first early remembrance of this was not scratch-offs or lottery or gambling. He was flipping sports cards, like baseball cards in school. And I totally forgot, like years ago when people collected cards, that's what you did. You'd bring cards and you'd flip them. And he said that was his early kind of indication to say, wow, he thought back and connected that activity with gambling. And I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Maybe the forms of gambling have changed over the years. You just reminded me of that also, something that maybe is not done today. And even getting back to the definition, maybe there was no dollar amount or money involved in that. But flipping cards, you were putting something of value.
Yeah,
You put a value on that card.
you're right. You're
And
right.
if you won or if you lost, and those are things we'll touch on when I continue, about, just some suggestions to keeping fun and entertaining. You know, if you do very well, you want to continue to flip the cards. If you lose that valuable, I'll say a baseball card is what comes to mind, you know, you want that card back.
Exactly. And you're chasing that feeling. You don't want to lose.
No, exactly. And even the whole feel good world that we live in. And maybe early on having to accept that things are not going to always go your way and there's going to be trials and tribulations. I don't know if that somehow, I believe that's been lost along the way. Maybe not. I know there are challenges out there.
Well, I will let you go back to the responsible gambling piece now, because we've been talking about primary prevention as it pertains to, say, youth, right? Because that's where we have the primary. But now responsible gambling sounds like we kind of start moving into that secondary level of prevention, which is about trying to reduce gambling related harm by keeping that form of entertainment that you mentioned. So I'll continue to monitor the chat and the Q&A, and I will turn off my video and let you get back to your presentation.
Okay, thank you. So the next couple of slides are going to deal with guidelines for responsible gaming, which is a term that the adult recreational gambling world refers to it as. Many of the legal operators of adult recreational gambling, whatever that may look like, online casinos, brick and mortar casinos, poker, online sports betting, legal online sports betting, all do have responsible gaming guidelines. We do a lot of work with the industry, but I'm not going to, I don't want to necessarily just focus on the adult community, but these are things that every demographic from the adolescents all the way to the seniors need to be mindful of. It should be entertainment. And what needs to be conveyed, we'll start with the adolescents. But as I mentioned, this is appropriate for every age group, for every demographic. Decide ahead of time how much time and money you decide to gamble with and stick to your limits. Easy? Well, not so sure about that. Play knowing that is likely that you will lose more than you will win. So make sure that you are playing with money that you can afford to lose. And let me interject there also. How about the time? And I know we'll touch on that in a little bit. Make informed decisions about your gambling. Know the odds. Well, how does an adolescent do that without parental supervision, being informed that what exactly does that mean? How do they know how to regulate their time? When I speak to the students, I spend a decent amount of time about talking about there needs to be balance in life. And what I'm experiencing in the presentations I've been doing over the last several months to the high schools that I've been plugged into and doing these presentations, and I'm grateful that the educators are aware and the administration and the SAC counselors, et cetera, that, again, we talk about gambling, but there's this whole phenomenon taking place in the video gaming world. Not that I'm an expert on it. There are many in the field. I'm sure many that are attending the webinar this morning have attended webinars talking about video gaming and the potential harms and the gambling component to video gaming that's been introduced over the last couple of years, the monetization, the randomization. And there's been a lot of talk and a lot of concern about the psychology of video gaming. Are the adolescents being conditioned to be the next generation of adult gamblers. Dan had mentioned, and let me go back for a second, one of the questions about, or comments about introduction of lottery games, specifically scratch-offs. We know during the holidays every year, we, not only ourselves, national, all our brother and sister councils throughout the country have a campaign that it's probably not a good idea. Yeah, I understand it's fun to see your grandson, your grandchild at a young age scratching off, and the excitement that you see in their eyes. Well, that excitement that they are experiencing is derived because they see how their parents, their grandparents, caregivers are reacting to it. And I mean no disrespect, absolutely not, about my next statement. Well, if gambling is legal, not for the adolescents, correct? You have to be 18 to play the lottery in the state of New Jersey. How come it's not fun to see them with a shot glass or a beer in their hand or a tobacco product? Again, I mean no disrespect. And there's been tremendous amount of advocacy, tremendous amount of prevention done in that world. And as a result of that, even though we are seeing still many problems throughout the country in the substance world, and now, well, even the whole concept of video gaming, how that affects, possibly the mental health of the adolescent. There's a lot of literature, a lot of information out there. As I started out the webinar this morning by saying, when you ask an individual about prevention, chances are, and here again, just even my comment when I say chances of, just this whole mindset of gambling, betting, just being embedded in our society and has been for generations. It's just the way it is. It's part of our DNA, the risk-taking component, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I believe that inroads are being made in the prevention world and even in the long-term recovery world to maintaining individuals, constantly sharing information, be mindful of what's going on. And I believe that's what the statement here is saying. Make informed decision about your gambling, know the odds. Well, if you're not presented with the information, how are you going to be able to make an informed decision? Always think of gaming as a form of entertainment, not a way to make money. I know not part of this, but other webinars that I have done, my colleagues, not only in the state of New Jersey, but throughout the country, we talk about, it needs to be a form of entertainment. You need to know when to have balance, when to stop, when you're crossing that line. But here again, if the information is not presented, how are they going to know? Realizing that if you win big, enjoy it, but always remind yourself it may never happen again. I don't believe that we're wired like that, so it constantly needs to be reinforced. How good does it feel when you win at whatever it may be in the work that you do, being able to help another human being, conveying information, winning something, whether it's for free. The whole concept of gambling, as I mentioned, is ingrained. Very important. Don't gamble when you are tired, bored, anxious, or angry. And I might be jumping the gun. I actually did a presentation yesterday to one of the brick and mortar casino groups here in the state of New Jersey. Again, obviously it was done virtually, the world that we live in today. Hopefully one day, I can't wait to get back in person. And to tie in with that, and as I mentioned, I might be jumping the gun, the whole concern about, impaired gambling, being impaired. Maybe if you're on the gambling floor as an adult, the operators can see that, offering, being impaired by the use of alcohol products. Now, New Jersey has legalized adult recreational marijuana. It's in the process of moving forward. My understanding is not going to be allowed on the gaming floors, but you could be outside and partaking if that's what you choose to do. Again, getting back to, does that impair you? Should you be gambling when that scenario is in place? I strongly suggest you should not be. Keep track of your time and the money that you spend on gambling. Becoming more difficult because of the online world that we live in, the whole internet. Take your family and friends seriously. If they're expressing concern about your gambling or gaming, they might be seeing something that you don't see. When you're involved in these various activities, you develop this tunnel vision where it's very difficult to see what's really going on. Do not gamble alone, which ties in directly with the statement before. Go with people. Although an individual, even though this is about prevention, that develops a serious gambling problem, eventually does not want to be around, does want to gamble alone, doesn't want to have people, family or friends with them, because they know that they're going to be chirping in their ears. Why don't we stop? Why don't we take a walk? Why don't we do something else? Only use your money to gamble. Don't borrow. And always realize that in most forms of gambling, you have no control over the outcome of the game. It's random. One of the things that I've learned, and the whole randomness, the randomization of gambling and video gaming. How do I describe this? Well, I guess the simplest way is if you toss a coin and 10 consecutive times it comes up heads. What does that mean for the 11th time you flip that coin? Well, it's still only a 50-50 chance that's going to come up heads or tails. But most people think that, well, no, I shouldn't say most people. I've heard both sides of it. Individuals will state, well, if it's come up heads 10 consecutive times, very strong probability to be heads again. And conversely, they're almost contradicting each other. They'll say, well, if it came up heads 10 consecutive times, 11 times it's going to be tails. Well, that's not true. Again, it's random. It's the randomization. It's always a 50-50 chance. When gambling, take breaks, walk around, eat, do something different, clear your head. Again, it comes with the balance. Take time. Keep it fun, keep it recreational, keep it entertainment. And always come back to, well, if these things are not shared, how are they going to know that? Regardless of the demographic that we're talking about. Keep your head clear when you gamble. Balance gamble with other leisurely activities. Many people plan vacations around going to gambling destinations, whether it's Las Vegas, Atlantic City, the casinos in other states. And I'm not suggesting there's anything wrong with that. They bring their children. The problem becomes where you might go, even if it's just a day trip, and you're on the casino floor, you're going to gamble a little bit, you're going down there for the shows, you're going down there for the world-class eating establishments. Although I know much of that's been curtailed now because of the COVID-19 world we live in, but hopefully we're going to get back to some kind of normalcy in the very near future. It's my hope, and I believe it's all our hope. When do you turn the corner? When does the individual that's gambling and all of a sudden hits that point where it's no longer fun, or that's all they want to do? It no longer becomes a leisure activity where if they've gone with friends or family members, maybe the main purpose they went down is to go to some show because there's some world-renowned entertainer that's playing at the specific venue, that they say, yeah, I'll catch up with you later, and they never show up. The gambling has just taken hold, and it's become the most predominant thing in their life. Go gambling with someone who does not have a gambling problem. We touched on that. Don't make the hole bigger. Don't chase your losses. And the last one, well, this is something that we've spoken about. Well, me and my colleagues historically, go with a set limit. Know how much time you're going to spend at it. Know beforehand how much you can play with, win or lose, have fun. One of the suggestions, as the last item here, is that don't take credit or bank cards with you when you gamble. And the basic concept, the idea behind that is that avoid the potential issue of, well, you went with a set dollar amount and you lost that amount. So let me get more money because I know my luck is going to turn. I know in the world that we live in today, cashless forms of payment are becoming very prevalent and may be the way to go, maybe the way things will be in the future. When we speak about tradition about credit and bank cards, the physical cards, now there's so many forms of cashless forms of payment, even going shopping today. I mean, I don't even have to bring if I choose to do that, which I personally have not. It's a learning curve. I come from a different generation that, you could just put the information on your card and you just swipe in front of the device at the retail establishment, online shopping, et cetera, where cash is no longer needed. Physical credit and debit cards are no longer needed. I know I jumped the gun on some of these, set a time limit, know how long you will gamble, how long you will play video games. But the adolescents aren't aware of setting time limits. And this is where parent involvement is instrumental. You have to limit the amount of time. I gave the example of my own personal situation with my grandson, who was 3.5 years old. I believe, I'm told that my daughter and my son-in-law, monitor the amount of time that he spends on the device. Are they 100% successful? I have my reservations. Sometimes you just get busy, and we spoke briefly about that before. Make your own decision about gambling. Don't gamble because others want you to. It should be your decision. Stay away from the peer pressure, which is very prevalent in the adolescent world. They do things on a dare because someone dares them to. How do you say no to that? Very difficult. Don't use gambling to avoid negative feelings or situations, anger, hurt, depression. Do not gamble with money set aside for everyday expenses. This is a concern, getting involved in activities where you're not mindful of what's taking place and you're now using dollars that should be used for day-to-day expenses, whether it's for groceries, other forms of entertainment. And most importantly, which I know is very, very difficult, accept losses as the cost of entertainment. Very difficult to accept the loss at any level. It's always feels better to win, in an athletic competition, in a school competition, becoming the valedictorian, getting that promotion, getting that pat on the back. No one wants to be disparaged, even though it might sometimes be for their own good. Talk to someone you trust if you are concerned about gambling. And with that, I will stop for a moment to see if there's any other questions, comments, conversations. As I mentioned, it's about having the conversation, just having a simple conversation. It doesn't have to be very technical, because a lot of times, maybe not for us that are involved in this webinar this morning, and thank you for your participation and attendance. We're in the industry. We understand these things. We've learned these things.
Yeah, we some good chat and some good comment here, Frank. Steve Ross. Steve, it's good that you're here. Thank you for joining us. He was talking about winning and starting at an early age. We keep talking about preventing gambling or gaming problems among youth, but it's that early onset, right? Not seeing the negative consequences, and when you win at an early age, even winning in general, it shows us like, yes, this is possible. We always say that's the hard part about giving up gambling. It's that we've almost been conditioned. People who gamble have been conditioned to know that every so often they will win something. But the problem is you don't know how much, when, or how often. And it's giving up that every so often, right? That intermittent reinforcement that makes it so difficult, but our minds have a hard time with that. Deshonda added a good point. I want to share this story here, and this is something that really summarizes it. She says she remembers, even being a kid and going to fairs, or, any kid who spends money at a fair trying to win a prize, whether it's a stuffed animal or, Chuck E. Cheese, Dave and Buster's. We have all of these around there. And then, going back to the parent that you're with or the loved one you're with, asking for more money so you can keep trying to win this thing that probably you could buy at the dollar store for $1. You're spending $20 to get a dollar prize. But it's the participation that matters. It's the excitement. It's the, hey, let me win this thing and I'll feel better. And she kind of identified that, and it connects to a point that Lenny Brazier, one of our treatment therapists, mentioned on this webinar today, that it's important to separate self-esteem from winning. That's really important, because if you win this prize, does that mean that now all of a sudden your self-esteem goes up? Well, for some people it does. I mean, they think better of themselves, but their identity is then rooted in the gambling, which can become problematic.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for that comment and share that. You said it was Deshauna?
It was a combination of Deshonda and also Lenny.
Okay. And it just reminded me, and these things, we talk about randomness, but even, by doing this, and you had mentioned it earlier, not only are we sharing information, but it gives us the opportunity to learn also and retrieve information. Those, I know you mentioned our neighboring state of Pennsylvania, and, our other neighboring states that I was very fortunate growing up that I spent a lot of time at the Jersey Shore. My grandparents had a place, then my parents had a place. And I bring that up because it just reminded me about arcades, and we were talking about fairs. Yes, the same concept. Was I really that interested in staying on the beach all day long? No, not absolutely. I jumped into the water. I came out, hit up my grandparents for, a couple of quarters, whatever it may be, because I want to go and play the games in the arcades. Had no concept that was gambling. And until I got involved in the industry, still had no concept of it. We talk about raffles and bingo and et cetera, all forms of gambling, and all of them, do offer benefits, but there's that small percentage that will cause them to develop problems, and like they become out of balance.
And that's what happens. Balance. You just hit it on the head there. It's that lack of balance that we start to see. And that's what makes addiction so tricky, and why it's so important that we have webinars and discussions like this about, prevention and awareness and education. We know that we're neither for nor against gambling, as you mentioned. Right. People can gamble and have fun, and it doesn't create a problem in many people's lives, and they do it as a form of entertainment. But, we're specifically here always to provide resources and information for the problem gambler and the loved ones. And that's where, when we start talking about prevention, we are concerned. We don't want youth to get into that at-risk group. And then for those who are at risk, maybe struggling with drugs, alcohol, trauma, PTSD, whatever it might be, we don't want them to pick up another addiction that might complicate their lives.
Right. And even in the prevention world, I spent a lot of time, and we're talking about the adolescents, but even the person that's in recovery, there's a prevention component also, whether it's having, a therapist, whether in the clinical world, whether it's going to some form of recovery group, whether a 12-step program, smart recovery. I just recently was involved in a webinar and it was presented by Hazelton. And the individual, the woman who presented it, made a very good point. She says, I really don't care what type of recovery, what type of program you're involved in, as long as you're getting the help that you need. And I think we have spoken about that, Dan. There's so many different forms that are out there. How you get there, I'm not as concerned with, but that you get there. So there's that prevention component, even in the recovery world, because it is an ongoing battle. Relapse, harm reduction, relapse is a form of recovery for many individuals.
You're right. And when we talk about people returning to use and going back, one way that we try to keep people on that path, right, one day at a time, is through the use of various resources like the ones you have listed here, whether it's Gamblers Anonymous, whether it's Gam-Anon for the loved ones, Addictions Victorious, which is a faith-based recovery program. But because of COVID, we saw the shutdown of some in-person meetings, and it's really hard to figure out which ones are open or closed. And I've put in the chat a website, gamblersinrecovery.com, which is a list of all Zoom or all virtual meetings that go on around the globe for people in recovery from gambling addiction. And it's not just a GA centered, it's various support groups. And as Frank said, all roads lead to recovery. It's a journey, and everyone walks at their pace on their terms. But we also know that you walk more successfully when you're walking with people, because addiction equals isolation. And in recovery, you need community, you need support. And you get that best by attending workshops like this, by going on gamblersinrecovery.com or other sites so that you can get that support. Frank, we're at the top of the hour. Any closing thoughts?
Just one thing. I just opened up the chat. I was leaving that up to you, but Harry mentions, stopping cigarette smoking, seatbelt use was started by addressing the youth and eventually became mainstream. And I agree with that 1,000%. And our hope is that eventually that's what, the gambling world will look like. Not to tell people not to, but give them the information. People still smoke. People, unfortunately, still don't want to wear seatbelts. But the number is less.
That's right.
I'm dating myself. I lost a lot of classmates when I was in high school in the 70s. Because back then, the drinking age, and I'll end with this, was 18. And there were classmates that were either already attained the age of 18 or close enough to it. There wasn't the concept of, it was a lot easier to obtain alcohol back then for the adolescents than it is today, I want to believe. But a lot of them were drinking and driving, and a lot of them lost their lives. So, Harry's point is definitely spot on.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I agree. And, I want to thank you. We're at the top of the hour here. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. We hope you have a great weekend. Stay tuned. Keep an eye out on your email. We'll be hosting more webinars and workshops as we move through the spring and into April, May, and June. Keep an eye out. If you have an idea that you want to see us talk about or cover, shoot us an email. We're happy to understand also what you're looking to learn more about. And if we are able to do that, we're happy to do so. So Frank, thank you. Well done today. And you have a great weekend.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for your participation, your comments, your thoughts. I wanted to keep this low key, not be technical. Just basically the theme of the month of problem gambling, just have the conversation.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, everyone. Be well.
Be well.